If we're going to say that sentence, that they're the best team ever in Counter-Strike, you have to then ask the question, are they just the best ever in esports or whatever? Like, at that point, they should be compared to, like, you know, the Fakers, League of Legends teams that won all the worlds and all the...
There's other teams out there who can overtake them.
No, I'm actually going to disagree with you on this one. Here's why. Right, Counterpoints has returned. Obviously, this is going to be an interesting episode because actually, this is going to be filmed right at the end of the cool-down period of the Blast Rivals Fort Worth. And then we're at the intersection of actually one of the bizarre details. If people don't know, welcome to old school CS. There's how it used to be. There used to sometimes just be a week when there was 2 tournaments taking place. In this case, often on different continents. Like maybe you'd have one in North America, and there'd be like DreamHack or something in Europe. So we do have the one where, if people don't know why IEM Atlanta has the weaker field, it's because a bunch of the European teams just chose to go to this PGL Astana, basically. And so you've got like a split scenario where it's why it's actually low-key for me, actually good that Vitality won that Grand Slam at IEM Rio, where it was still all stacked and they had to beat like FURIA and Spirit. Because even though NaVi's at the Atlanta one, if they'd have won it there, it would have felt like, instead of winning the Grand Slam, that's just like picking it up off the floor. You know what I mean? Like, who else was going to win it at that point? So, low-key, that's good. So what we'll do is this. We'll just rewind a second. Let's just start from the Blast Rivals, and then we'll go from there with the storylines into the other 2 tournaments. So, the problem is, Pimp, this will sound like a broken record, because I've got like a way to correct what people keep saying. You know, people keep saying this thing where they go, Vitality winning's boring. And it's like, if you actually listen to what they're saying, though, Pimp, they're right. If you only take literally that sentence, that Vitality winning is boring, that part, I know what they mean. What they mean by that is, especially if they're not super deep into like nerdy parts of CS, what they basically mean is it's always the same outcome at the end of the tournament. In fact, you could even argue these last 2 tournaments make it even worse, because the last 2 tournaments is Vitality like sometimes playing a close series in the group stage and people being like, ooh, can G2 beat them? Ooh, maybe there's a chance. And at the end of the tournament, it's like, and they didn't lose a playoff map, which is like, yeah, that part of the story is the same every time. But I will say, if you watch this final especially, bro, those first 2 maps are crazy entertaining, though. Like, they're not boring in the sense of, like, you could never watch that Nuke game and go, this is boring. You're watching it. Remember, I actually think the cool thing, I'll set you up for the beginning of the series. The reason why I found NaVi, by the way, I think this might be the most soul-crushing of all the losses, is did you see that stat that they flashed on screen? I believe it was like a B-Trams one. You know, he works a blast and comes up with like piece of trivia. When it was on Nuke and NaVi was up, no, it wasn't even when they got to the 11-0, because they did start the game 11-0 on CT side. When they were up 9-0, there was a stat that flashed on screen that's mental, Pimp, because you'd almost think like this was a stat that you put up because it's wrestling and it's rigged and you know that Vitality's going to come back. The stat on screen said that in CS2, when teams go 9-0, they had a record historically of like 71 wins and 1 loss. And the joke is, by the way, the 1 loss was like Aurora, because of course if anyone could fuck up a 9-0 lead, it would be Aurora. And then when they flashed that, well, guess what? Obviously in the end, Vitality did it, didn't they? So it's now like 71-2 or whatever. Even though that makes almost no sense anyone could ever come back and do that. So I actually think, low-key, here's what's sad. On the one hand, I want to turn to NaVi and go, guilty game, a fucking amazing game. That was pretty insane. Same thing in the second about the Anubis again. You can tell they had a bunch of like interesting ideas on CT side. But again, like to me, in a weird way, that final was why Vitality's like unbeatable, bro. Like it almost doesn't matter what you throw at them. Somehow they have some way to adapt. Some player can overperform. Even if, essentially, unless you completely kill them dead, if you leave them 1 round free, they just get the breath back and then come back in the game. Like in a way, it'd be the most soul-crushing match ever. So here's the question I have for you, Pimp. Since we ourselves have spent many episodes saying it's not just even the best team now, maybe it's the best team to ever play any version of Counter-Strike. In fact, actually, I saw Vitality say them to themselves, by the way, on Twitter, and it's a bit kind of like self-serving when you say it yourself, but they're not wrong. If we're going to say that sentence, that they're the best team ever in Counter-Strike, you have to then ask the question, are they just the best ever in esports or whatever? Like, at that point, they should be compared to, like, you know, the Fakers, League of Legends teams that won all the worlds and all the teams from Dota that won TI and whatever teams you want to go with, someone from Halo mode was epic. So here's the question I have. If they are that epic, and when I'm watching it, I have to say, Pimp, even I thought they lost some of those games. When I was doing my core stream with Yumi, especially on the Anubis Pro, every time NaVi was like, deep in the game, I was like, they probably should have won this actually. I think we're going to go to map 3, it'll be 1-1. And then somehow, Vitality, they just can't, they're like Superman, they can't lose, mate. They always find a way at the end to win the game somehow. So here's the question. If you are Spirit in Rio, if you are NaVi here, NaVi in a couple of finals actually, right? If you actually do play a really close game, but at the end, as I said, not only does everyone lose, at the moment, bro, no one wins a map off them. Should we actually still criticise the second place team? Like, does that mean that even if you play the best ever, should there be a way to break through? Should there be a way to sometimes beat them? How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's complicated for many reasons, especially when you're describing Vitality as well, because it does feel like they have that aura, of always finding a way to win, regardless of what the game is like, regardless of whether the scenario is that you're down 11-0 or whatnot. Like it's one of the phrases that I've been using a lot lately to describe Vitality when I do desk work. It's like they always find a different way to win, and to me that's what makes them the greatest. It's not the same recipe they use over and over, and people haven't figured it out, or maybe some of the other teams are not in a good enough shape or good enough form to test Vitality. No, it's more so that they find different ways of winning every single game almost, which is kind of unique in a sense. So how much do we credit that to Vitality? And the question you're asking me, I guess, is that how do we evaluate the team that goes up against them in the final in terms of like ranking them and getting a sense of where their strength is at or where their form is at, and how close they are to potentially being a contender to win a trophy, etc., etc. And I think it's very difficult because it's just different to play a best of 5 grand final versus Vitality. Like that game you're coming into, especially when you speak to Blade or when you hear him talk in interviews, you can be 100% certain that the way NaVi, I guess, prepare for a team like Vitality, it will be different than when NaVi is preparing to play Foot or preparing to play Astralis or whoever else they face, a Gamer Legion, for that matter. So I think it's a game that lives its own life. So in terms of how much stock value do I put into the performance of the losing team versus Vitality, not really a lot, outside of the fact that, as you said as well, when you look at a game like Nuke, clearly interesting. When you go up 11-0, like you're supposed to win the game and you're supposed to take that map. And obviously you don't do that unless you play a solid CT side. But then again, you can make the counterpoint. Okay, the T side was lackluster. Normally that's where NaVi gets the job done. Normally that's where Blade, Alexi B would always guarantee you a couple of rounds and you would close out the game. But it's almost like Vitality redefined those rules, It doesn't count against them. It's just a different team, a different caliber. So I try not to put too much stock value into how well did X team do against Vitality in the final, because to me that's a game that lives its own life, and you can, to some degree, you can say that about any game in Counter-Strike, but I think it's more relevant when the game is a grand final, when it's a best of 5 grand final, when it's in an arena. Like I think there's more factors that allows me to put less and less stock value into the losing opposition, especially in a time now where Vitality have just shown consistently, throughout at least this year, but also the vast majority of last year, that they'll just find a way to win if they want to, and it may sound rich to say that because obviously they had the later portion of 2025 where they didn't win, where they couldn't get over the finish line versus FURIA, where they lost a couple of games to Falcons as well, etc. But when you look at the scope of the last 16, 18 months, like the notion is that they find a way to win. Whether that is Saivu having a bad game, then someone else steps up. The Nuke game, as an example, to me, what stands out the most for me in that particular example is why I don't really blame NaVi as well. It's like Flamesy, we've spoken about him, being the player that has made the hugest step up within Vitality. Like he's the most improved player, maybe in the world of Counter-Strike, compared to where he was last year and the amount of impact he's having this year. Like he's playing like he's a top 3 rifler in the world. He was the one who stepped up massively on Nuke. He was the one who carried it together with Messi, who we also label as a player that when Vitality needs someone to keep them alive, it's almost always Messi who does the dirty stuff. Like he did it in a game on Mirage against FURIA, where he bought some time for Saivu to come alive. He did it again right here. He did it in the Major Grand Final as well in Budapest. So it's just the fact that they have 5 players that can all contribute to be one of those winning factors in different iteration, different ways, different fashions, and different times in a game of Counter-Strike. So I don't know what to say in terms of that. To me, it's more interesting to look at NaVi and see, okay, how did they make the final? Like, how well did they play in the quarterfinal? How well did they do in the group stage? How well did they play in the semifinal? And obviously also how well did they do in the final? But it almost seems, as you said, like it almost seems unfair to compare anyone to what is to me, the greatest team of all time in Counter-Strike. So I would rather compare NaVi to everyone else. Just like when you compare the new iteration of Falcons we're going to see in Astana, where they're not going to face Vitality, there's always going to be that aspect. Sure, you can be a contender to be the next one who can take a jab at Vitality, but before you beat them, before you go in a final and beat Vitality or take off 2 maps and push them to a 5-map best-of-5 grand final, at that point, I'm not really putting too much stock into how you do in the final, more so how you got there in the first place.
Because I can say the actual thing that's interesting heading towards the major is that on the one hand, if you're NaVi, it's like you can't change the fucking channel, mate, because the next event for you is Atlanta, and odds are you're probably going to be in the final there playing another BO5 against Vitalis. There's some group stage shenanigans and you meet him earlier. So if you're NaVi, it's a bomber, because essentially you could go to the major having never beaten them. And even worse, I think people saw this stat. It's another stat that was being thrown around on the final, is the last time NaVi even won a map was 2024 with their gel, and it was the Spinks Vitality. Like, they haven't against this Vitality even won a map, bro. Even though admittedly they played a lot of really close regulation games, they certainly haven't been bad. Right? The reason I think that's crazy, bro, is even back in the day when like Team Liquid used to lose to Astralis all the time, you still had the sensation though, because actually one thing I was quite underrated about Team Liquid was they used to beat every other team. Everyone else they literally could beat. So I always thought for them it was always just like, if someone else beats Astralis, then we could do it, couldn't we? If you're NaVi right now, at the moment no one beats Vitality, and you don't either, like, so it's a bit of a bomber. Like, if you look to Atlanta, where I assume they're going to end up playing at least in the playoffs, if not the final, I'll tell you another problem they have, bro. One, they clearly have this psychological disadvantage that, like, they've lost every type of game now, bro. It doesn't matter what they've done. Like, they've even had excellent, some of these maps they're losing, they're actually having some really good high-level players, or, like I'll give you an example. In that final, actually, I've heard a lot of people saying this, that Anim Graph 2 update, because obviously that was the first tournament, is going to help the Oppers. Bro, wonderful, looked dope. He looked really good in that match. Like, he was hitting all his shots. The real problem they have is twofold for me for NaVi. It's why it's a little bit of a bobber, because right now, unfortunately, even though they are number 2, I don't expect them to beat Vitality unless they can get a fluke. Like, at this point in time, I've got to say, even though it's whack, because you can't do this if you're NaVi in your locker room, low key, I actually think at the moment you sort of need like Vitality to help you out, mate, and have like a really bad game, or like something ridiculous, like Zero have the worst map of his life or something. You need something like ridiculous, because there's 2 details for NaVi that's crushing my soul, bro. One, as you saw in this one, they're not really a team that like loves Anubis, bro. They just know it's one of the only maps you can try and force Vitality on, where Vitality will tell you they don't really practice the map much. So you've seen twice now they've had a chance to beat them on that. So one, if you do that but it just never works, eventually that is going to make you just think like that's not even a viable strategy. And then the other one was, there was another stat they showed on the screen in the final, which is a really bad sign, which is actually Vitality is like one of the only teams, bro, that Makaze has like just a bad record in terms of like rating. I think it was only that Anubis game he had a good one. Aside from that, it's the team he struggles against. And if you think of his style of play, to me, he's what like enables the T side you're talking about. If you're Alexi and you don't have a piece like that, you're not going to win as many T rounds, mate. You're not going to be this like, because in a dream world, that would be the player you'd ask to have the best performance against Vitality, right?
100%, and that is an issue, but that's like it goes 2 ways, because that's what's elevated NaVi to now be maybe the second best team in the world, right? Where I agree, Makaze has done a tremendous job, and one of the biggest issues NaVi have had for a long time has been the lack of firepower, and he kind of closed that gap up until to everyone else in Vitality. But I feel like what you're touching on is also one of the things that I like to do when you address a game. You can go into details in terms of, okay, you have these 2 teams against each other, you have these different player types, these different playmakers, and you have 2 coaches who view the game in a different way, 2 in-game leaders who have 2 different styles, etc., etc. That's sort of like the technical aspects of the game, the mechanics of the game as well. But there's also a psychology warfare going on in between every single game. And I think the issue, and you said it yourself right here, it almost feels like for NaVi to beat Vitality, they need a bit of help from Vitality, because I feel like the only time so far this year we've seen Vitality be vulnerable is whenever they go into a matchup and maybe they're not laser focused, or maybe they don't pay the same amount of respect to a team like, let's say, G2, when they were playing them in Rio with a stand-in. Now, obviously Vitality knows they're going to win that game regardless, or at least that's the mentality you're coming in with, and they came dangerously close to losing. They should have lost that game. They faced a couple of match points and survived. But that's not something Blade can look at and be like, okay, let's try to replicate that. There's no way, that's off limits, so he can't do that. Same could be said for whenever they play Falcons. Like, okay, Falcons have shown to be a team, despite having their own struggles, like with the firepower, with the Monesi Nico combo, with the Kyusuke coming in as well. That's a way of maybe challenging Vitality. And then Blade looks at that game and think, okay, so what is it that is working for Falcons?
What's the blueprint?
I can't copy any of that shit. I don't have a Modesty.
Yes,
I don't have a
exactly.
Kyusuke. I don't have a Nico, right? I have to do it in my own way. So the matchup, both stylistically, but even more so from a psychology point of view, is an issue for Navi. Because one thing you can be damn sure of is that Vitality will never ever walk into a game versus Navi, whether that's in the group stage or in the playoff or in a grand final, and underestimate them. Like, they have a lot of respect for Alexi B. They have a lot of respect for Blade, right? So that little edge, that sometimes a team like G2 may get versus Vitality, where they don't really consider them to be a threat, that can take off 1 or 2% of focus, or they can maybe, I don't know, allow, Robs to be a little bit more impatient with his lurks, or Flamesy goes a little bit too harsh in on the entry effect. Like, some of these minor details and small details can be an issue when you play those kind of teams, but Navi are never going to have that luxury whatsoever. So in that regard, that's almost the biggest problem, is that when you look at the current Navi roster, I think they can be the second best team in the world, and that reverts back to the series that we had a couple of episodes ago, where I said, if you're Navi and you can make a roster change where you can acquire a guy like Frozen, or acquire a guy that can give you more raw firepower, I think you should do it, because there's always going to be a cap to how well you can do when you're facing teams like Vitality.
Because like I say, the only problem is, if you're Navi, if we're the script writers, we're actually set up the script that you're not going to beat them at the major, mate, because you played them a million times, you haven't. But this is where the WWE script writers have killed it on the Falcons one, Pimp, because Falcons without karrigan actually was the team that's beaten Vitality the most anyway since they've had Robs. And then not only do you get karrigan in, by the way, if people don't know historically, karrigan obviously like the king of shenanigans and beating Vitality at majors as well, so you've even got that. You've almost set it up perfectly, because they don't go to the same two events before the major. Like, obviously Falcons goes to this PGL Astana, where at the moment on paper they should be one of the favourites, and then they have that like CAC type event, whatever it's called nowadays, the CS Asia one, and that's also an event that doesn't have Vitality and also will have like a limited field. So, but here's the problem, Pimp, if you want to set this WWE storyline up properly, you need Falcons to win these two events and then Vitality win the other one. That way then at the major, if they do meet, it'll be like the ultimate, like, what will happen, because in theory nobody can know what will happen, including the teams, right?
That's the cool thing, and that's why we can have a conversation about that later. That's why I love the fact that we have two tournaments going on at the same time, because it actually poses a question that we can't have the answer to before we see the two teams meet each other at Cologne. So I love that, and I agree. In terms of writing the script and in terms of wishing for what would happen, and I know people are going to hate this because they don't like Falcons. I would love for Falcons to come in, and go into the grand final straight away, maybe even win the two events, just so we can have that conversation and be like, okay, so how good are Falcons, so when they face Vitality at the major, is that a game that we can now look forward to and be like, okay, with the way Falcons smashed their opposition, the way they won those two tournaments coming into it, with karrigan, as you said, who have a bit of a history, being bringing the shenanigans, and honeymoon periods as well. Another thing, the karrigan, if you look at his track record, his teams are always doing well in the beginning, so why wouldn't that be the case in Falcons when you have all that firepower surrounding you? Same could be said for Modesty and Sonic. Whenever they join a new team, and they're a little bit more hands off, they do better, so don't practice too much, I guess, is the advice you'd give Falcons in that regard. But I agree, to build that narrative and build that storyline and build the whole anticipation, that's super, super cool. And the only reason we can do that is because they're not at the same tournament. So that's, different conversation perhaps, but that's, I think the main argument people fail to realize when they complain about the fact that there's two tournaments going on at the same time. I can to some agree, or to some degree understand it. It would be nice to have them all at the same time, but we have so many tournaments throughout the year where all these teams are at the same tournament, right? So it's not often that we get to split apart the two fields and then, make assumptions or a bit of guesswork or maybe a bit of anticipation building up to the big one where they didn't meet again. And second of all, with obviously Atlanta coming in now and the one in Astana as well, the time zones are completely different. So if you're one of those type of guys who loves to watch Counter-Strike, there's literally going to be a game live 18, 20 hours a day, every single freaking day. So in terms of complaining about that, I like watching Counter-Strike whenever I do, whatever I do, sitting on a bike or whatnot. I can watch Counter-Strike 20 hours a day. That's a pretty good luxury to have.
By the way, this is how you know that there is a decent amount of people that, for whatever reason, if they don't hate Falcons, they at least like prey on their downfall, I guess how you say it in English. Because, bro, like normally you would expect that because everyone's whining about Vitality winning every series and even like every playoff map now, you'd think everyone would be desperate for anyone to have a chance to beat them. You'd think it'd be like that thing in the Avengers, that meme where they have that character Loki Turkey and he's in that prison, and the meme is where he goes like, you must be pretty desperate to come and ask me for help, basically. Like, you'd think it'd be like that, right? Because, bro, here's the thing. Even though I do think, like, put it this way, if I had to pick right now, they probably do win the major. Why wouldn't they? They've got every quality going for them. They've got every single predictive metric says they do win it. But if you want to dream and do what you just did there, where you paint some narratives that are historically accurate and say, like, without yet seeing a team, because we haven't seen Falcons play, without yet seeing what they do in the survey, if I was to dream, could Falcons win the major and beat Vitality? For the reasons you just said, yes, they could. You could argue they've just got the GOAT IGL, who also is the GOAT IGL at, like, working as a stand-in or with stand-ins or with a new lineup or, you know, in short term, he got every single, like, narrative element outside of studying the game says it's possible. So here's the question I have for you, Pimp, is because I haven't seen them play yet, I acknowledge both. I acknowledge it could either go really fucking badly, maybe they just bomb completely, that can happen too, or I think here's the thing for me, I don't think there's an in-between. I think it either goes badly because it just doesn't work, or if it works, because what works is the dream, like you can get together in the playoffs, you make sick mid-rounds, all the stars, but I think if it works, it really works, and then maybe this is a real storyline, and like, I don't know if they actually beat Vitality, but maybe they can be the team that challenges them and makes it an exciting game and stuff, right? Where are you at on this one? If you had to predict, as of not seeing any of the games yet, what is your sense of Falcons? Are you more on the boom or bust side? Which way are we going on this one?
Well, initially I'd be on the boom. I think they could be interesting, you know, and I don't see a reason why Falcons, you know, with the current field of teams, with karrigan coming in, with all the firepower, like they're going to remain competitive and they're going to make a splash, you know. But if I were to, you know, just based on pure gut feeling, obviously, as we haven't seen them play, we don't know how they're going to approach it. Still, you know, very limited in terms of interviews from the players to get a sense of where it's heading. But I'm afraid there's a third option, and that option is that they do incredible well in the first couple of tournaments right here. They may even win, you know, in Astana. They may win CSC, who knows, or go to a couple of the grand finals. And then you have built that anticipation. You think, okay, Falcons, they're back on track. karrigan came in, you know, they're playing like the second best team in the world. They've shown before that they're the only team who can beat Vitality, and then they bust out at the major, you know, to some random team they're not supposed to win against, or not supposed to lose against. And that's the third option that I'm, you know, I don't know, half a year ago, I probably wouldn't believe in it, but I feel like I've seen it so many times now with Falcons that even though you bring in karrigan, I feel like it must be still playing in the back of the mind of the players. Like, I don't think changing kicks in for karrigan is going to erase the fact that all these four players have been there. Did you see
the picture they posted when karrigan and Nico got to the hotel? Where, like, it, bro, listen, people are going to think I'm nitpicking here, but, like, Nico can smile. He's not like a weird guy. Bro, in this picture, you would think it was like, you know, like a terrorist picture or something. Like, he can't even break a smile, you know what I mean? It's like, low-key, I wanted to believe that wasn't even real, Pim. Like, come on, that's years ago, guys. Like, you know, they've all grown up. Like, remember, they were almost kids. Oh, I'm not karrigan, but like, fucking Nico was a kid back when that shit was going. He was probably like 18, 19 when he was doing that. Like, don't you think that? I know it's not a big deal. Like, I'm not overanalyzing it like what people do, they did eat breakfast together or whatever. But that is the sort of thing where it's like, fuck, is this just a dream? Am I just off in a fan world where they're going to get together? Because that almost looks like Nico's like, yeah, I totally want this to happen. Like, it's not convincing, you know what I mean?
No, I know. You know, but that's the thing. That's the beauty of a picture. You know, you never really know what's behind it. But that's my issue with it. You know, I feel like, as we've spoken about a couple of times in episodes, you know, half a year. Anyway, I had no doubt, and I still have no doubt, that Falcons will find success eventually. It's just a question of time, you know. When you keep investing into your lineup, you keep pouring money into it, at some point it's going to stick. Whether it's going to be this iteration, or this major, or the next major, or the next run of tournaments, I don't know, you know. But I do feel that there's a bigger and bigger, you know, possibility of, you know, the whole, I guess, culture within the team. And I think that's not been spoken enough about, you know, when you look at historically speaking, like the Danish North as an example, you know. I know we go way back, but that team had a lot of talent. They kept investing into new talent, but the culture within the team was so rotten that regardless of who you got in, like you brought in karrigan at some point, you know, the most upbeat guy, you know, the guy who would come in and he would change the mood of the team and he would install a work ethic. Like, he came into that team and he capitulated to the culture within the team. I'm not sure karrigan are gonna come into Falcons and he can single-handedly change that, you know, a gray shadow that's been luring above them for such a long time. So I'm still where I think it's going to be great. I think they're going to be explosive. I think when you have so much individual skill, that's going to be interesting. I'm also curious to see, to me, the most interesting thing in terms of how is karrigan viewing the whole Kyusuke-Nico dynamic, because we posed the question in an episode a couple of times ago, where it's like, at what point do you maybe give Nico a bit more responsibility and give him back some of his roles? Because it's not like Kyusuke is doing bad, he's just not delivering Nico numbers. And the few times where they played without Kyusuke, or where they played with a stand-in, Nico has been playing hearts out, some of the best Counter-Strike he's played in a long time. So if karrigan sees the same trend, like, do we maybe see a Falcons who's giving a bit more responsibility in terms of the fracking department back to Nico, and then maybe letting Kyusuke grow a bit more into it, and nurture him a little bit more, and place him in positions where pressure is less high, also considering that he sucks in playoffs. So I think there's something to be said about that. So it's a gut feeling, but I think they're gonna do well. I don't know if they're going to win a tournament before the major, but they're going to do well, and they're going to be interesting to watch. And then I have this inkling feeling that, almost like it's supposed to happen, that if they do well, they build up expectations where at a point where, maybe Falcons can do the unthinkable and win Cologne Major. Then they bow out before the playoff and lose in a 2-2 game against, Paravision, in a game that they never should be losing, and that'd be heartbreaking. If the same thing just, happens one more time, then I don't even know what to say. And that probably would be the ideal scenario for all the Falcons haters, If they win a couple of tournaments and then they drop out of the major playoff, before even getting to it, and then everyone can laugh at them and have a good time.
Yeah, I would even say it's not even necessarily that you have to actually win the trophy at this PGL. You just have to look really good. Like, if you just gave an awesome game, even if you lose, essentially what you have to do, like we're saying, is just build the hype for the major. Just make us believe, because there's no vitality, you're the only one team that when they face, they won't have much data. Well, they only have 2 lands worth. So I'm with you. I just want to set that storyline up, because I feel like if everyone's going to be a doomer about every other team in the scene, then you have to assume Falcons is the one that can do it, since they've got the super firepower. Because remember, we're not saying they have to be actually better than Vitality and have an era or something. They just have to win that one tournament. If you just win that, and by the way, of all the ones as well, it might seem boring that Vitality wins all the regular circuit events. They didn't. They almost did it last year with Blast Austin. But if you don't win the major, suddenly it'll get a lot more interesting. Like, if they won every regular season event and then no major, that would even make Vitality suddenly on the hot seat, bro, in second season.
Yeah. And the better question is, if not Falcons, then who? Like, it's not like there's a strong field of teams right now where you're like, we're already established that NaVi are great, sure, but they're not realistically gonna be the team that beats Vitality. I can't say they won't, in Cologne, but there's nothing that points towards it or suggests that's going to happen. And with the mouse rebuild, forget about that. They're not gonna be ready for Cologne. The Spirit rebuild with Magix as an in-game leader, etc., etc. Sure, it may look slightly better, but forget about it. They're not. Nothing is trending in the direction that someone could beat Vitality in Cologne. The only unknown factor, and the only team where I feel like there's potential, and it could be really, really spicy, is Falcons. And that's why, again, put your hate aside, put your dislikeness aside of Falcons. You can hate watch them for as much as you like, but if you're one of those guys who complain about it's boring, that Vitality are winning every single tournament, and you're getting bored of watching Counter-Strike, and it's not interesting anymore, and you also hate on Falcons, then what the fuck are you asking for?
Exactly.
Like, the one team that can potentially put you out of your boredom, you also hope fail. So what are you doing here? So I hope personally that that's going to be the case. The Falcons give me a bit of expectation and anticipation leading up to the Cologne Major, where at least we can build on that story and talk whether or not that could be interesting.
And I'll just say this as well. The reason why I agree with your overall sentiment, that like one way or another, they're like Thanos, mate. It's just inevitable eventually Falcons wins. The reason why is, let's say this Falcons does it and they bomb the major and they don't make it. Well, then they're definitely going to make roster moves. There's no way they're going to stick with that 5-man lineup. Like, they probably change 1-2 players and make it equal, whatever. They'll do something drastic. So eventually, the Falcons drama will never end. If you're a Falcons hater, the bad news is this. Every time they fail in a way, it forces them to spend more money and maybe even get even better. So who the fuck even knows? Yeah, I can even throw this out there. There's even a little impact out in the fucking wind that could potentially be picked up like everyone wanted 2 years ago. Right, here's the thing though, Pimp. Speaking of who will get it together and win the big one in the playoffs, in the past, as I bring up the Prize Picks logo here, you will know I've had to talk about basketball. But good news is now Prize Picks is actually a preferred partner of the NBA. So as the NBA playoffs is underway, they have something called the Do It Live 2026 NBA Finals Sweepstakes, where you pick live squares during the NBA playoffs and you could win a trip for 2 to the NBA Finals. To enter, you just make a $5 lineup with at least one live NBA player pick during any part of the 2026 NBA playoffs. A live player pick is just as you can imagine by the name, a pick you do when the game has already begun. Once the game begins, you can actually still pick teams for your players for your lineup, and you just do one pick, and if you do so, you get into the sweepstakes, and the winner actually will get prize tickets for two to the NBA Finals, which is kind of cool. And obviously, as well as basketball, they're available in 50 states. What you do, prize picks are super easy. You just pick between 2 and 6 like stats projections. When they say the stats projection, essentially their models just look at each player and say it's a star player. It'll say how many points he's going to make, how many rebounds he'll get in the game, assists, and all you do is just either from like studying the game or go off gut feeling or whatever. You just pick more or less. You just say, will they do more than that number or less? It's quite simple actually. It's a really easy concept, and also it does allow you to do things like, if you follow the game, maybe they're doing the prediction based on recent form, but maybe against this opponent, you know that team's weaker in some way or stronger in some way defensively, and you have some angle as to what will happen doing so. Also, they've got all sorts of little extra things, like they have an early payouts feature, actually also when a game's live. If your player's doing really well early, you can actually cash out before the game ends if he's doing well. They've got a thing where you can do stacks, which you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup from different stats categories, etc. And it's easy to do. Just download the Prize Picks app today and use code COUNTER, as it says on the screen, to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code COUNTER to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineups. Prize Picks, a preferred partner of the NBA, as I said earlier. Shout out to Prize Picks. Okay, so here's an angle I want to ask you about, though, Pimp, which is, since we have these two events going on separately, another angle for me is this. In the same way as if you look at Falcons, if you want to build up that narrative, they're going to win the major. Yeah, you probably want them to win this PGL Astana, right? But if you also look at it, anytime there is no vitality, we have like a silly saying in English, right, which might sound weird, I guess, if someone's trying to translate it literally, that says, when the cat's away, the mice will play. Because the premise goes, like, think about Tom and Jerry. If there's no fucking Tom, bro, then Jerry can do whatever he wants, can't he? The little mouse can be eating cheese, fucking riding a bike, whatever, swimming in milk or whatever. I'm trying to remember what he even did in the cartoon. Some weird shit like that. Like, he was always doing some aura shit to bait him, wanting to come and attack him, right? If there's no vitality in PGL, well, then all the other teams that spend all the time whining about vitality, you better fucking win then. So if it's not Falcons, right, I'll tell you the other two teams that are on the hot seat, bro. Spirit with Donk. Listen, you can say, oh, but if it wasn't for Donk and Z, there's no Donk and Z with here, boys. So if you're the best, come and win it. Then the other one obviously is FURIA, even though they did absolute trash at the last event and got actually humiliated and eliminated like last place. These are teams that on paper we need to also believe have a chance to win tournaments, to win the major. So let me ask about the Spirit one, right? Pimp, do you think this is a team that has pressure to win this event?
Yes, they do. They have pressure to at least get to the grand final. They have pressure to I guess, do as well as they did in Rio. You know, we can't have a tournament where the caveat during Rio was that Hallie was not present, you know, the coach, and we think to ourselves, maybe it has a greater impact, smaller impact, who knows, you know, we're not quite sure how much involved he was in the day-to-day preparation, etc., but it did feel like, you know, that they played a bit more freed up, you know. Tania had a great tournament individually, etc. So I want affirmation and I want confirmation that what we saw during Rio is the direction they're heading, because if Spirit does poorly at this tournament and don't do well in Astana, then we're back to square one, and then again I'm willing to kind of like write them off as just like you'll make the playoff most likely because of Dunk, congratulations, you're not going to beat Vitality. You're not going to win the major. You're not a contender for that. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Spirit to confirm that what we saw in Rio is them getting better and them trending in the right direction. That's super important for a team like Spirit. Same could be said for FURIA. I think the conversation now has to change in regards to FURIA. They kind of been riding a bit of the goodwill, you know, then they kind of get off a little bit easy in Rio because Fallen retires, etc. But fact is they've lost 4 series in a row. And the way they lost, you know, in Dallas and losing to FaZe and their new lineup, take nothing away from FaZe, they probably played better than anyone would have expected, to be fair. But you're not supposed to do that if you're FURIA. You're not supposed to do that if you are serious about being the first contender to Vitality. You're not supposed to do that if you're serious about, you know, telling NaVi that, hey, back off, you know, we're still the second best team in the world. Because when you lose 4 series in a row, that's a bad sign, obviously. But when you look at the teams they lose to, you know, sure, you can lose to Falcons, you can lose to Vitality, but losing to Gamer Legion and losing to FaZe, as you said, it's embarrassing. So when you add that up, you know, then yes, losing to Vitality, losing to Falcons, well, you could say Falcons played with a stand in Rio. Is that embarrassing if you're FURIA on home turf as well? I'd almost argue yes. Like, you shouldn't be losing that game. Third place decider, did it mean much? No, but still, your FURIA, you're supposed to win. So I think the conversation has to change in regards to FURIA and basically be put out like this. I feel they're the team with the most pressure on their back. If they don't do well in Astana, they drop off from being that team where it's like, yeah, maybe they can find back to the level we saw in late 2025. And that level was good enough to beat Vitality in grand finals. That's not the level we see from FURIA whatsoever. And if they do poorly in Astana, I'm willing to say that, listen, that's the level that places you as maybe 5th, 6th, 7th in the world. And let's be honest, that's not where FURIA fans and FURIA themselves see where they're at. So I think they're the team with the most pressure together with Spirit. Outside of the obvious Falcons, Mouse coming in with a new project, etc. I'd even say the Mongols, to me, is a little bit of a sleeper pick. I think without Vitality in the tournament, they could be really, really interesting. Normally a team that don't really lose to teams beneath them, and they do well against teams on their own level as well. So I don't know. I think it's open. I really could see like 5 or 6 different teams winning. You could even argue Paravision are in contention, to be one of those teams that maybe could win that tournament. I'm not sure about Aurora as well, but it does really feel like as much as we kind of place Vitality on a pedestal and they're so far ahead of everyone else, it does feel like the remainder of the pack is closer than ever. The gap between number 2 to number 10 is very, very small. So at a tournament where number 1 is no longer there, it does feel like it's open for the taking for little Jerry.
I'm going to put the most pressure on Spirit for this one, because to me, first of all, you've even got that angle that, look, I realise Kazakhstan isn't Russia, but listen, when I grew up, that was considered the same region, if you know what I mean. Like, they all consider that, they would say, if you can't have an event in Russia, they would say home turf would have been, back in the day, even though it's politically incorrect now, to say Ukraine, they used to all love to play there, the Cyber Arena was there, and obviously I'm going to assume Kazakhstan, they're obviously comfortable going there. It's why last year, actually, before they did the Astana one last year, I remember I had Magic's on Snake and Banter, and he even said something like he was actually looking forward to a rare event where people wouldn't boo him for being Russian. That's actually one of the only ones where they get the home crowd cheers. So, and the reason why, if you're Spirit, I think you have to win this event. Forget even what we just said about Falcons. That's irrelevant. Their storyline's irrelevant to you. Here's why. Because aside from the odd moment, Donk is still really good. You still have a super weapon there that can MVP any tournament. And then also, I actually think now is when you have to start counting this Magic's period of being the IGL, all the roster moves they made. Because, bro, this is going to be their 6th LAN. It's been months and months now. I actually gave them quite a lot of leeway in the first few months, because if you make a move like they did, where you shift all these rosters, the roles around, and then you give a different IGL, it's very rare that you do have that storyline we just said earlier about karrigan, where you can actually expect the guy to walk in the door and immediately get results. No, it's the opposite. I especially if we believe all this stuff about Halley, I'm going to assume it takes time to build up a system and to get people acclimated to the calls. Same reason why in NaVi they don't hit the ground running immediately. They usually have to again shift a few things around, build up a couple of maps, But I think now is where if I want to actually believe Spirit could themselves do damage and win the major, you got to win this event for me though. This one not only doesn't have Vitality, doesn't have NaVi either. If you're Spirit, you got to think that way too. This is a very real chance to win the tournament. And then on the FURIA one, I want to pivot a bit and ask you about FURIA. Here's why. Because, bro, first of all, when they had that run at Rio, they still looked really good, mate. They could have beaten Vitality in that semi. Maybe they could have even won. But if you watch the Blast Rivals, that was such a shit event. I'm not even trolling when I say this. That makes me start to understand why Fallen is announcing so far in advance he's going to retire, bro. That makes me think that didn't just come out of the blue. I think that if you look at the problems they've had this year, well, just this year, they generally haven't just been as good, bro. They've been a lot sketchier. They've had a bunch of up and down results. They've even had ones where nowadays they're not even a safe team in the group stage, bro. They'll usually just randomly lose a game or get played close. It makes me think that actually Fallen's not an idiot. If he really thought he was the 3rd most likely team to win the major, I think he'd sort of play it a bit cool and just wait and see if he won the major or not, then say, right, okay, I retire or I stick around for another season. This makes me think that already they know some of the cracks are real behind the scenes. Because here's the problem I have, Pimp. This is an even more extreme version of what I've seen with teams like Falcons and Mouse in the last year or so, which is when these teams underperform, I always think if you're the in-game leader, you have a really hard time explaining yourself. Because if I just look at this FURIA roster, Pimp, right, assuming if Fallen was to retire tomorrow, which isn't, he's doing it at the end of it, but say he retired tomorrow, and we have the same roster, and we're not going to make moves. I know there's these rumours that maybe Molodoi goes to a different team. Let's say the other 4 stay in place, and all it is imagine you put in the newspaper, looking for IGL for team, got Keserato, Molodoi, Yuri, you can, bro, if I'm an IGL, that's one of the best rosters I could get. get right now. Like the joke is, if I was karrigan and didn't work out in Falcons, I'm coming here, mate, like knocking on the door, like, hey, give me a crack at this team. I could probably win with. I think this team on paper should be capable of winning. Like, they are good pieces. Like, every time I watch them play, I think, actually, if you got a little bit more from this play, you can win all these matches. Like, it's why when they come last place, it's kind of shocking to me, mate. Like, I actually wonder in that sense, like, what's your take on that? Because I feel like people want us to say that they were always frauds, but I do think that what they did last year was real. Listen, maybe it was like, that was a hot streak. You have that happen, sure. But now it feels almost shocking the opposite way, that they're so underwhelming sometimes.
I agree, but I think it's what I said in the first episode we did this year, you know, that last year it felt like every player played 5% better than you could expect from them. And that was every single player. And nowadays it's not the same case anymore. And I think, you know, as much as I like Fallen, you know, from making the switch into a rifling IEM leader, as much as I think, you know, from a tactical point of view, how they set up the rounds, how structured they are, and how they still allow freedom to Molodoi, Yikinda, etc. Like I think the whole setup for the team is there to succeed still. But the players are not delivering the same as they used to, you know, and that's when it becomes an issue. I think firepower is such a vague term to use in modern day and age Counter-Strike, but firepower is mega important. You know, when you speak to any pro player out there, especially in CS2, like at the end of the day, if you lack firepower, you have to win elsewhere, and you have to do something else in order to gain that edge. But consistently winning over a course of long time, you're not going to do that if you lack firepower or lack too much of the firepower. We saw that with NaVi. The second that McCarthy started to play like the player he was supposed to when they signed him, or like the talent that he was supposed to, NaVi looks twice as good, you know, and that's not because the rest of the team has started to play much better as well. That's one player who just tips the scale a little bit in terms of firepower, and now all of a sudden he unlocks the entire thing. I feel like it's reversed with FURIA right now. Molodoi, he's not the same player he was in late 2025. I think the last 3 months he's at a 1.05 rating, which for an AWP player it's quite average. You know, that's where you have him in the conversation about, okay, you're not near m0NESY, you're not near Saivu, you're not even in the same ballpark anymore. Whereas I think it was fair, you know, for people to be excited about Molodoi and say that, okay, if he continues down this trajectory, if he finds the same amount of impact, he has those crazy flicks, big moments, clutches, you name it, that yeah, maybe we can put him in the conversation with m0NESY and Saivu, but he's nowhere near that right now. Like, he's nowhere near Shiro at the moment. And you know, you lack 5%, 10% from Molodoi, that's gonna take down FURIA a whole lot. You lack 5% from Yuri, who hasn't had the same year whatsoever as well, even though that last time in Rio he started to play well, which is one of the reasons I think why they did well in Rio, was that some of these players that has been underperforming for a little bit so far in 26 actually started to live up to what we saw last year. So to me, it's just an individual form thing right now for FURIA. I haven't seen a team that is getting outplayed. I don't see them getting out-called that much, you know, but I see a team that is putting themselves in winnable positions. But when you need one player to get 2 kills instead of 1, or when you need one player to win the 1v2 clutch, which they did, you know, for the vast majority last year, or in the 3v3s, etc., those small margins are tipping the other way at the moment. And that makes FURIA look way worse than they are. I agree with you. They're not frauds. What they did last year was not by accident whatsoever. They're playing proper Counter-Strike. They're playing really good Counter-Strike. But that's only enabled if your players are in form and if they're playing with confidence. And I can mention at least Yuri, Yikinda, and Molodoi, who may be the biggest the biggest issue right now, so to speak, for FURIA, because when Molodoi is playing well, he just unlocks another level for FURIA, and he gives and creates so much more space for Yikinda. He can then allow Yuri to have a game where he's not that impactful, and Quesarado is probably the guy who benefits the most from having, you know, Molodoi playing well next to him, because that combo becomes insanely strong when they're both on it, and that's just not the case we're seeing right now. Molodoi is not playing poorly, he's just not having the same amount of impact as he used to, and to me, that's the biggest difference. And I think people sometimes forget that it's the smallest margin that can sometimes tip the scale and make a team. Let's say Molodoi is just 5% off. Well, the entire team will go down 15% because there's side-on effects and follow-up effects that is hard to quantify. But that's kind of what I'm sensing when I see FURIA. And as you said, the way they lost in Dallas was embarrassing. Like, that's not supposed to happen. Regardless of how poor you play, or if you have Molodoi having a tournament off or whatnot, you're not supposed to lose to FaZe, and you're sure as hell not supposed to lose to Gamer Legion either. That's unacceptable for the standards of FURIA.
Since FaZe is one of, actually, because it's just a weak field, one of the bigger names at IEM Atlanta, let me ask you this question. This is an angle you never heard before, bro. The Corpium's crazy on this.
Okay.
Like, you won't believe this, bro. Like, people will see in a forthcoming show I've got on my channel coming out soon. There's an angle that comes out of nowhere to be Corpium that, like, Brokey can get better. And here it is. You know, you've heard recently in the update of the game, they've done that thing called Anim Graph 2, where they've changed the way the models move. And supposedly, like, spoiler, if you have a look, the people who think it's not that impressive are the riflers. Because supposedly people claim it's actually opposite. It's going to help the most, because the main problem they claim compared to CSGO and CS2 is, because this makes the models look a bit more like CSGO when they dodge, was that in CS2, the way the model would sort of like start to move in a direction, so your brain, remember, if you think of how the human brain tracks like a trajectory of an object, you're gonna, if it's leaning that way, you're gonna think it's going like that, right? So part of what the donk slide basically did, if people don't know, was abuse that mechanic where, like, if you were the AWPer, think about it, right? If people don't know, I'll give everyone like a 30-second history lesson in how AWPing developed in Counter-Strike. Back in the day, there was none of this like jiggling a corner in 1.6. You just sort of like wide swing the corner, or you just like instantly take the duel with the guy. Now, it wasn't actually a concept against the AWPer to jiggle it. The reason people invented jiggling the corner is because they realised the most effective way to beat an AWPer is if he just misses the first shot, because then you've got like a few milliseconds to get out and either rush him or just make him fall off the corner, don't you? Because he's got fire for that next second. So basically, what people would say, if this is true, is that in CS2, you were almost like default baiting the AWPer to miss, because he couldn't fully guess, like, were you going to go back on the jiggle? Were you actually fully pushing out? They claim now, if you look, I've actually played the game, but I wasn't paying attention to that bit. I was just trying to shoot people. I don't think what they say is totally wrong. When I've looked at some screenshots, it does look a little bit more like you can lead the shot a bit more like an AWPer wants to. You can sort of see, because obviously the nightmares, again, if people don't know about AWPing, there's a reason why historically every AWPer that isn't a ridiculous one like Modesty, you don't put the crosshair right on the edge of the wall. You put a little bit of distance, so you've got some reaction time to go sort of halfway between the two and make up for not having the most insane reflexes ever. Like, put it this way, there's a reason why, if you're a kid at home, you know, like they used to say about stunts on TV, if you watch Zero on Dust 2 shooting through those double dust doors, you can't do that. Don't even try and do it. You should lead it way into the door like Zero would and just try and click as they pass by. You're never going to hit that shot. Like, only Zero can do that, or Modesty, or old school simple, you know. So anyway, here's the Corpium. People claim that since this update was on at this blast, and that Brokey didn't look that bad, maybe it could help someone like a Brokey. Because obviously, if you're looking at FaZe Pimp, there's so many elements that on paper could be bad here, right? Like, Twist has been forced to be the agile now, bro. We don't even know if he chose it. Yeah. Then they've got Brokey, obviously, has had all those problems over the last few months. And then even the new guy, the Netu guy, who actually did not that bad, I have to say, at blast. He had some rounds that sort of impressed me. He's not a player I had on my list to bring in, mate. He was just like some young nobody guy from France. I would have thought, if anything, he'd be on 3D Max as well. I don't know, FaZe clan. So I feel like for FaZe, you're having to scramble a bit to really make it plausible they're good. So what either one, do you think this is that Corpium? Can it make Brokey better? And two, what do you actually think of this FaZe clan? Because I do think a lot of us thought it might just be nothing at all. There's something there, right? I mean, these results can't just be completely imaginary.
True. I mean, first question, can it make Brokey better? Sure. Can it make him better to a point where I start believing in Brokey again? Probably not, you know, because then you see everyone else have the same effect.
Yes.
And you know, it's not like this update is going to affect Brokey only, and then, you know, that's it. Then you'll also see Modesty and Saivu and Shiro just become even better, you know, so the gap will stay the same between Brokey and those guys. But maybe it can help them to be not a liability anymore for FaZe Clan, which would be great. So I'm not really sure if I buy into that angle. But for FaZe, honestly, no. I think the way you described it right there, the only reason why we can... I can see why you could build it up and be like, maybe there's something in there, but that's because they set the bar so goddamn low, you know. And I still would say that there's a minimum bar that FaZe as a brand, as an organization, as a team with Twist, Frozen, you name it, regardless of their roles and who's being pushed into what, have to meet, you know. And they met that, I guess, during Blast Rivals, you know. And in one tournament, I would like to see that again be confirmed. I would like to see that happen again at the next couple of tournaments they play, but I'll be completely honest. Like, I've lost faith in FaZe completely, and I almost don't care how well they do now. You know, sure, it would be nice if they do somewhat decent, so they can rebuild the lineup, or maybe convince Frozen to stick with them. You know, that's also one of the things that at least I've picked up, and I don't know if there's been a follow up to that, but it almost sounded like Twist. You know, he's very honest in the way that he's describing what's going on within FaZe Clan, and he's, you know, reacting to community comments and stuff like that, which I appreciate a lot. But what I got out of it was that he's almost like externally begging Frozen to stay. Like, I'm hoping he wants to stay and build something up within FaZe Clan. I'm hoping, and if I'm Twist, I totally understand that. I'm also hoping that Frozen would want to stay if I'm Twist. Because what the fuck am I going to do if he leaves me? As well? Like, then I'm left with nothing. Boki, come back to his normal level. Is that what I'm gonna bank my in-game leading career on? It's not gonna happen, right? So I get that as well, but that's where I'm at with FaZe right now. It's sure anything they can show, in terms of glimpses, etc., that's cool, but I feel like the only way you can make that, I guess, ankle stick is that if you accept the fact that the bar is so goddamn low for FaZe, not qualifying for the major, not being a top 15 team. By that extent, yeah, sure, they did show something in Dallas, and sure, they were somewhat intriguing. Beating FURIA is no easy feat, regardless of how poorly FURIA is playing. But I'll be honest, like that's not enough. It's not like that doesn't erase 2 years of lackluster performances. And again, take away the major fluke, and look at the last 2 years for FaZe. The bar has been put so low that it takes a bit more time for me to get excited about it, to be completely honest.
I have to say as well, I am still quite skeptical of FaZe myself, bro, because I'll tell you why. It's a bit like what you said earlier, because it's true. If anyone looks this year, the most bizarre thing of all is that actually the teams Vitality struggle against the most is teams with a stand-in, or teams where like they just on paper should be like kneecapped, like the G2 example. It was the Hunter that was out. It's the IGL, for fuck's sake. It was no Kiyasuke in Falcons. Like, the reason why that's not a good sign is I feel like it's similar with this FaZe Clan at Blast, bro. Right? The real issue is because everyone in the world followed that FaZe Clan storyline. Because remember, even if you were a top team, part of you was like, keep FaZe out the major, because the majors were notoriously they do these miracle runs. Like, get those fuckers out now so we can all just like not worry about it for the major. Once you saw them fail, bro, and then karrigan leaves, who's considered like the spirit of the soul of the team, actually in a weird way, anyone facing them at that Blast, it's really, really hard. Fans will never get this, Pimp, right? It's never that consciously you sit around and go, well, we can't lose this game, just do whatever. But part of your unconscious mind will be like, they don't even have karrigan, bro. They've got a fucking standing random French kid, and then what? Twists his IGL. Like, on paper, you actually will just be like, I can take a breath out and just play this game. I should probably win easy 2-0, right? So, low-key, I actually think, like, in a way, you can catch them off guard if you're FaZe Clan. I think that's what I would say about this IEM Atlanta. For FaZe Clan, what I'm looking at is this. At least give me something comparable to what you just did at Blast. If you do that, then I can believe there's a real project here, and this is like an actual thing we can build on and we can go somewhere. If you don't do results like you just did there, like in this field, by the way, you've got to be at least playoffs probably to make me believe in you. Then if you don't do it, I'll just think that those teams just came in. Remember, they couldn't prep for you. They had no data. And also probably they just didn't expect you to be good. And, people like Frozen have had a good game, and Twist has carried a bunch of clutches. And yeah, you had a little, a spicy little one-off, let's say, but that's the problem. Low-key, I want to reinvest in FaZe Clan, Pip. If they actually have a squad where you can at least beat at normal tournaments and borderline playoff team, now I can get interested again. It won't be like the old FaZe Clan. I won't be expecting to win the major, and obviously you don't have karrigan. Yeah, we're gonna have to have a different project. But I was before Blast, I have to say, thinking, I don't even know if I ever want to see that team play again. Isn't it just a mess of players? In fact, it wasn't every storyline. Let's get these players out there. Let's get Frozen over a different team. Let's get Twists out.
Yeah, and I think that's where, at least that's my angle, and taking my personal, opinion away from it, and just looking at FaZe and what's important for them. It's mega important that now that they're not at the major, that they at these tournaments, as you said, just show something, show glimpses of doing good, because if you're a player that FaZe are potentially targeting right now, like there's a great likelihood that after the Cologne Major that there's going to be roster shuffles. There's going to be certain teams who are unhappy, the season hasn't really been going as they would like to. So let's say that some of those sought out after players, right? If you're FaZe Clan and you bomb out now, they're playing Pain Gaming in the first game, and if they win that game, they're playing either NRG or Foot, I believe. So technically, if you're FaZe Clan and you're heading into Atlanta, you have to beat Pain in a best of 3 game, and then you have to beat either Foot or NRG. Realistically, that should be possible. Again, Twist, you're Frozen. Like, I'd even argue that you're the favorite. That's the playoff for you right there. Yep. But if you fail to do that, if you fail to make the playoff, then what happens after Cologne when maybe 5-10 players are on the market that have the have the capabilities, have the level to be someone who can come into FaZe Clan and make the difference, they would be looking at FaZe Clan and being like, even I can't do that much, A lot of players, when they switch rosters, and that's something people really fail to mention and think about whenever they do it, Take Robs as an example. When he went from FaZe to Vitality, Robs believes so much in himself. Like, he believes he carries so much impact in the way that he plays Counter-Strike that he's looking at Vitality being number 4, number 5 in the world, the misfunctioning with Spinks. He's thinking to himself, if I join instead of Spinks, we're going to be number 1, because that's the amount of impact that I have. Now, let's say that in the same scenario that after the Cologne Major, even a player of Robs' caliber, who's, by the way, not going to be on the market and is going to be very, very difficult to attract for a team like FaZe Clan, but even a player who's to some degree delusional about how much impact he feels he can have on a team would be looking on FaZe and thinking, even I can't save that shit, That requires more than just me joining. Then I need someone else to join. And then it becomes significantly harder for FaZe to acquire the talent and get the players they want to. So I think if you're FaZe Clan, if you're bought into this project, if you're the GM right now of that team, like you better pray that you do not necessarily well in Atlanta, but you do well enough that people are still looking at FaZe being like, okay, they may be just me away from joining it. They may not just need my impact, If I come in, then I can bring them back to life. But if it's so bad that people are like, even I can't do shit about that, then it becomes significantly harder for FaZe to acquire the talent. They need to rebuild that project. So to me, that's the interesting angle, that it's not about them winning a tournament, about them going into a grand final, because it's unrealistic, even in Atlanta, when there's not that many teams to fight for it. Like, I don't see them beating NaVi, as you saw. Like, it's not really realistic. But I do see a team that desperately needs to do something so that they can keep rebuilding after Cologne, and they can make that a lot harder for themselves if they just bow out and don't do anything, which to some degree will be understandable. Like, if they lose to Foot in a best of 3 game, one of the most up and coming teams right now, one of the most hungry teams as well to do well, I wouldn't even blame FaZe. I wouldn't be like, that's not good enough, or you're supposed to do better, because essentially they're not with what's going on within the camp right now. But it's just going to harm them so much in that after period, during Cologne, when they're going to reach out to players who are unhappy in their current teams and try to convince them to join this project. So if anything, I hope for Twist and the boys that they do somewhat well, so we can have FaZe back, after Cologne with an interesting roster, at least. Before we do the last point of the show, I will tell people, because I know not everyone's super nerdy and lives and breathes the game. We've actually got a thing that they've launched for Last Free Nation, where if you go to herald.lastfreenation.com, they've basically launched a newsletter that you can sign up to called the LFN Herald, and every Thursday they send it out, and it'll just summarize like big details in esports, all the different categories, film, gaming stuff, just all the things we cover on LFN. Anyway, the last point, I'll pivot on what you just said there, Pimp. I also think the other team, when I look at the field for the Atlanta one, which is fairly wide open, because essentially we're all going to forgive people for not coming top 2. It should be NaVi and Vitality, obviously. But after that, you have this weaker field. You just said it there, bro. I think the other team for me who has the most to give from this event is Foot. Like, I think if I look at their recent form, where they've been really good against the lesser teams, also in general, they've matched up against a lot of the top teams and given them 3-game series and close game. If I think of them, like, if anything, bro, this is more of a little bit of like a lower expectation event for a lot of teams. I mean, people like Vitality are basically going to treat this as like they tune up before the major. They're not going to be going like at 1,000,000%. They're going to win it, but it's a bit like what they just said about this blast, where apparently that's true, by the way. They really didn't practice for the blast. Because they came straight from Rio, so they had to just chill, and they just sort of like played off whatever they had in the tank, So I think if you're some like Foot, as you said as well with the bracket, like, bro, you've got again, not a bad bracket to make the playoffs, so you can immediately be in the equation, as it were. And that is one of the teams I personally also hope for arrive at the major as like a little bit of dark horse potential. Let's throw those guys in the playoffs. Let's see what happens, right? Because like you say, they're not just like a good team. They have that thing where I agree with that term, but they are rising. There's a thing about their quality where you feel like this can keep going, mate. This isn't like a fluke. It's not a one-off. Like, this looks like they can actually keep doing, like, being dangerous. So I'm kind of hyped to watch them. I hope I'm not usually like an underdog fan, but I think this team can kind of become a real team, mate, like one that can do real damage. Yeah, I very much agree, and that's what kind of annoys me during the Blast Rivals as well. Technically they were the team who pushed Vitality the most. They took a map off them, and third map was 13-10, I think, for Vitality. So a somewhat competitive map with the asterisks of the coach playing instead of logs. Like, again, it's again built into the point that we made about Vitality, that they do the absolute worst work against teams, with stand-ins where they can just like, whatever, we're just going to get the job done. And that kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth, because I think people are still sleeping a bit on Foot. Them winning Bucharest was like, okay, now they emerge. Now they're technically a tier 1 team. They're a team that we have to account for. They're a team that can win trophies at tournaments where Vitality are not showing up or not playing at their best, at least. Then they play one tournament with the coach, and people look at that result and be like, oh, you lost to Astralis, you finished last, like you're not that great anymore. But the asterisk is you're playing with your coach. If that's not going to be the case for the upcoming tournament, then I'm still very much bought into Foot. And as I said, like if you're FaZe and you're facing Foot in that game, which most likely is going to happen, FaZe win the opening game, Foot win the opening game. I mean, it's hard to not side with Foot being the favorites, despite looking at the FaZe lineup, with Twist and Frozen and whatnot, Brokey for that matter as well. You're still looking at a rising team, at an emerging team where they have all the capabilities in the world to beat a team like FaZe and even do it quite convincingly as well in a 2-0 fashion. So if they do that, well, then they book a spot into the playoff. They're in the same group as Vitality as well. So odds are they can avoid them before the grand final. And all of a sudden we may have a scenario where Foot can, beat NaVi in a semi-final and go up, and play a grand final versus Vitality with the full lineup, which would be, to me, super, super interesting to see, because we've seen NaVi do it a couple of times now. Not there for it yet. Don't seem to get over the finish line. Surely I wouldn't be mad about a NaVi versus Vitality grand final. Again, to see them play Nuke one more time, to see them play Anubis one more time, to see if they learn something from that. But if anything, I wouldn't mind, Vitality taking on a team like Foot in a best-of-5 grand final and see how far are Foot away from being one of those teams that we put into the mix when we talk Spirit, when we talk Falcons, when we talk NaVi, etc., etc.